Today we're going to be talking about Saros, which when I bought the game last Tuesday, I booted it up and then I went on to play it for about 13 hours straight. If that isn't an obvious sign, then yeah, let me just tell you right now, I'm really loving this game. Saros is made by the same development team behind Returnal. When I saw the reveal trailer for Saros a little while back, I jokingly called it Yellow Returnal, but that's pretty much what this game is. Returnal, but now in yellow. Really, really yellow. If you have played Returnal and if you liked that game, then this is definitely a game for you. It does pretty much everything that Returnal did better. And I could probably end the video right there if I'm being honest, but there are probably some of you out there that haven't played Returnal, or maybe you want to see a bit more of the game before throwing money at a AAA price title. Right, so let's get into it. Saros is a third-person action shooter roguelike with an emphasis on bullet hell mechanics. It is almost impossible for me to talk about Saros without also talking about Returnal, because they are just so similar. The best way I could describe it is that if Returnal was an experiment, then Saros is the refinement. Saros takes everything that Returnal did and either tweaks the systems in meaningful ways or just drops them completely. On the surface, the two games may look very similar, especially in the way that they play. Returnal is very much a game about dodging and shooting, whereas Saros is a game about dodging and shooting, but also blocking and parrying. So let's start there. Enemies in Saros have one of three different attacks that they can use, a blue, a yellow, or a red one. Blue attacks can be shielded, and attacks that you shield can be used to fill a power bar, which is how you charge your special attacks. Yellow attacks need to be dodged, but you can dodge through the projectiles or just completely avoid them if you want. You can also shield yellow attacks, but they will cause corruption, which is a debuff that lowers your total max HP. Red attacks need to be avoided and cannot be dodged through, though they can be parried and sent back as an attack if you hit it at the right time. In the settings, you can actually change the colors of all the projectiles in the game, so they can be any of the colors of the rainbow that you like. Just this one system change alone opens up the way you play Saros when comparing it to Returnal. It kind of gives the player options on how to deal with attacks, and it makes the combat in the game more front-facing and more interactive. Another difference from Returnal is how the gunplay works. Pretty much every gun in the game has some kind of auto-aim on it, which might sound a bit lame in theory, but I believe there is a pretty solid reason behind this specific design decision. In Returnal, when things start going sideways or things get too overwhelming, you'll often find yourself spending all of your time avoiding enemy attacks rather than being able to shoot back. And the auto-aim allows the player to pretty consistently be able to damage enemies even when they're on the back foot. And I think this decision also allows the game to be much faster paced, so enemies can be much more aggressive, and it also speeds up the combat gameplay without making it feel like you have no windows of opportunity to retaliate. The auto-aim is pretty generous, but it isn't so bonkers that you can shoot enemies that are like 180 degrees behind you or anything. It's just putting the emphasis on movement and dealing with threat management over just simply dodging. As a player, you'll have a primary weapon, which will come with an alternate fire mode. And also you have a special ability, which in Returnal the special ability was tied to your gun, whereas in this they're separate. You can find different guns and special abilities by opening chests, which will all have different attributes, but their overall strength is tied to weapon proficiency. Weapon proficiency is another system taken from Returnal, which is just a fancy way of saying weapon level, which you level up by collecting the crap that drops out of killing monsters. Killing more monsters during a run and going out of your way to complete optional rooms will net you more XP. You also have a dash, a jump, shielding, which I talked about earlier, and over the course of the game you unlock parrying as well as an ultimate ability. And there's a few other abilities that you'll unlock while going through Saros, in which the game just kind of introduces like something new every biome or two, pretty much right up until the final part of the game. The basic structure of a run in Saros is very similar to most roguelikes, but of course, Returnal. You work your way through a biome towards a big boss at the end of the biome, then when you have beat it, then you'll unlock the next one. The main difference, and probably one of the most heralded features of the game, is that Saros actually has the ability to start the game from your most recently unlocked biome, or any of the previous unlocked biomes if you so choose. Giving the player the option on where to start is something that really helps deal with the repetitiveness, especially as you want to try and complete the story. Starting at the most recent biome will help alleviate that, but starting at a later point in the game is also much harder to do. If you choose to go back a few biomes, it's easier to ramp up the strength of your character, which can also help you get over difficult parts of the game. It helps cut down on frustration with players who hate repetitiveness and hate having to replay earlier biomes to get through, but also gives players a freedom on being able to ramp up the strength of your character to beat difficult parts of the game. Another unique part of Saros is the eclipses, which are these sometimes optional, sometimes not events where you can trigger an eclipse on Carcosa, What this does is make all of the enemies in the game much harder as a trade-off for having more XP and currency drop from enemies. Also, higher proficiency weapons and slightly stronger artifacts will also spawn, although they will be corrupted and come with some kind of negative trade-off. Some environments also just become much more dangerous in general. From an enemy and difficulty standpoint, it works. You can absolutely feel the difference in the toughness of the game during an eclipse. The problem is that it rarely feels worth the trouble unless the game pushes you into it, which is why if I could think of anything gameplay-wise that I think Saros could definitely improve on, it's artifacts. Artifacts are the perks on which you can pick up throughout your run to strengthen Arjun, but it's basically your build. They won't let you break the game in any meaningful way. And when you are playing during an eclipse, these do start to feel more useless because the cons almost always outweigh the pros on them due to how underpowered they kind of feel. Although the opposite is actually true for the weapons. So the corrupted weapons almost never feel like they have enough of a downside that you wouldn't just take a weapon that comes up that you like to play with. The downside is almost certainly that, weapons show up that you don't like, as just essentially useless to you. It's not that you can't craft a decently powerful build over the course of a run, it just feels like artifacts and the changes that they are capable of are just a little weak in my opinion. It's good enough for this game, but it's not really a standout element which a lot of games in the roguelike genre are known for. So something I want to talk about, which I don't usually get to talk about very often because the games I review are mostly on PC, is how Saros utilizes the PS5 controller. If you're unaware, the PS5 controller has adaptive triggers, which is a setting that developers utilize to adjust how hard it is to press in the triggers. It sounds like a gimmick, and I was absolutely a skeptic until I bought a PS5 late last year and played Astrobot for the first time. It is so weird how this one little thing makes the difference in how using a gun in a video game can feel. And Saros' implementation of the adaptive triggers is to have both the alternate fire for your weapon and your special ability to be bound to the same trigger. If you hold down your left trigger, it will start to give you some good resistance about halfway down, which is how you activate your alternate firing mode on your weapon. But to activate your special, you have to really pull it down all the way. This sounds really stupid, I know, but this little detail does so much into making me feel immersed into the combat. Having that extra resistance to pull down on your special ability makes you feel that kind of power spike in your hands that you see in the gameplay. It's something that I feel like a lot of people would need to feel to kind of believe how much of a difference that the adaptive triggers on the PS5 controller make. Anyway, I love how the controls feel in this game. They're excellent. The adaptive triggers, good use of them. Another way that Saros differentiates itself from Returnal is with its metagame progression. In between runs, you can spend resources you collect on permanent skill progression to make Arjun stronger at the start of a run. Whether it be increasing his max health, the frequency of which health regen drops can happen throughout the game, or how strong they are, or things like his special bar meter being stronger, or increasing the base level of his weapon proficiency at the start of a run. The skill tree is giant, and I don't think the game expects you as a player to fully unlock everything, and more so to just focus on the things that you feel like you need or you are lacking in. Major parts of the skill tree are locked off behind beating bosses, so there is a cap on how strong you can get before you need to advance in the game to continue unlocking stuff in the skill tree. On top of that, there is also a way to tweak difficulty for your runs, whether you want to make them harder or easier. There are things like having your health be restored to full every time you reach a boss, or having damage dealt just be slightly lower. There is a cap on how easy you can make the game, but not how hard you can make it. These things are great to help make sure that more players can make it to the end game of Saros without trivializing the experience. Whereas in Returnal, if you weren't good enough when the difficulty spike of the game hit, then tough shit. And I'm always a fan of when games are smart enough to trust that players are able to tailor the difficulty of the games for themselves, but it also gives the masochists some crazy challenge runs to do if they're so inclined. The last thing I want to talk about gameplay-wise is the bosses. I think these might be my favorite part of the entire game. The creature design is so fucking awesome. Each boss in the game is unique in how they look and how they're fought. And I think why a majority of them work so well, especially the ones in the latter half of the game, is that they all feel like they could have been the final boss of the game. There were multiple times while playing Saros where I felt like, okay, this is it. The game has been leading up to this boss, only for the game to keep going and give me a bigger and better boss fight later on. The mechanics in the boss fights are challenging without being overly frustrating. They have more of a focus on being adept with the mechanics of the game rather than being adept with learning overly complicated attack patterns. The latter is certainly handy, but being good at the game is the priority. In Returnal, you just had to dodge everything. In Saros, you usually have at least 2 ways that you can deal with a situation thrown at you. If a boss is shooting off a bunch of red projectiles, you can get out of the way, or if you're confident, you can parry. I suck at parrying, so I choose to dodge, even though it's probably harder to do. As a player, you can tackle a boss fight in a way that is more comfortable to your style. The only boss fight in Saros that I think is absolutely vital to learn a lot of the attack patterns and the tells of is the final boss of the game, and it's the hardest one in the game. And it's also probably the only boss in the game that feels like it came straight from Returnal. But I'm fine with it being the hardest one because it is, the final boss of the game. And I'm not showing it here because I do want to keep it spoiler free. The bosses are hard, but they're good and rarely are they totally unfair. Moving on to the story focuses on Arjun, played by Rahul Kohli, who you may know from Midnight Mass or iZombie, I think. Arjun is part of an expedition team called Echelon 4, sent to a newly discovered planet called Carcosa to find out what happened to the other 3 expeditions that landed on the planet before them. Upon crash landing, Arjun is tasked with trying to find survivors as well as figure out what happened to the other crews that landed on Carcosa. Arjun has other priorities, as you will hear him tell himself probably about 50 times throughout the game. He is looking for Nietzsche, his partner who is on the first expedition to this planet. Saros is much different to Returnal in that we actually get a cast of characters and the story is much more straightforward. But I do think that the story of Saros is one of the weaker overall aspects of the game. The crew of Echelon 4 might as well have been wearing red shirts on them with numbers painted on them, with the order in which they were all just going to bite it. Because the story does a pretty piss poor job of making me think anything other than these guys are toast, I also found the characters of Echelon 4 to be pretty uninteresting and not really have that much agency overall in the story. But my disliking of these characters could also be tied to how I played the game. So you can talk to your fellow crewmates in between runs of the game if you fail or whatever, and they'll have little conversations with you and you'll learn more about them, which I did whenever I got the chance. Major plot points of the story though usually move forward when you complete a biome in the game, and I kind of blitzed through the first half of the game. A lot of the early areas I beat on my first or my second go, which is the time you spend the most with these characters. It wasn't until I was kind of watching a streamer friend of mine play the game while I was eating dinner one night, and they were struggling a bit more with the early game, and they were having a few more conversations in the hub area with the crew that I kind of realized that there was a little bit more depth to the characters than I experienced. I do think that even if I did experience all of that stuff for myself, I'd still call the first half of the game's story pretty weak, but it's something to keep in mind that because of the framework of the gameplay and the progression of the game, some story or some character moments can be missed by just being good at the game. Or even just having like a normally decent run that can just skip over a couple of things. But I can confidently say that the story actually won me over in the second half. The story is a bit of a slow burn, but once it starts laying down the clues and the puzzle pieces start coming together on what happened on Carcosa, and what the eclipse is and what's going on, and also when we start getting more insight into Arjun's character, who does feel a little bit one note in the first part of the game as well. It's the second half of the game when it starts leaning into more cosmic horror, is also the same time when the story starts becoming its most interesting and its darkest and its creepiest. Like, pretty much all of the good stuff is backloaded into the final half of the game, and I know it sounds like I'm kind of being vague about the story beats and stuff like that. I just really don't want to spoil anything. It's a weak first half, but a brilliant second half, which leaves me feeling in the middle overall on how I felt about the story. It's uneven. Also, Rahul is a good leading man for this game when it lets him be. It does feel like he is sometimes restricted by the script he's given, but he's given enough moments to shine throughout the game where I was very much convinced of his performance, and it's good. Moving on to a different kind of performance, let's talk about how the game ran. I played Saros on a PlayStation 5 digital, and this game ran like a dream, as pretty much all first-party games should. I experienced a small handful of frame drops throughout the entire run of the game, which were not enough to worry about, but were only noticeable because how good the game was running pretty much the entire time I was playing, which I was fine with. And also, the game looks really great. I mean, you guys have been looking at this game for the past however long, 15-20 minutes. I think it really does speak for itself. While I loved the heavy blue colors that Returnal played with, I definitely feel like they ran out of ideas on what to do with various biome themes towards the end of the game. Saros does not have that. It has about maybe 7 or 8 different biomes throughout the game that all have different themes, distinctive art styles, and they all look great in their own way. If you're a fan of the way the Remnant games look, I think you'll love the art style of this. There's a lot of dark mechanical sci-fi stuff going on. I think it looks great. I mean, it looks like shit, but it's purposely made to look like shit, so it looks good. Moving on to the music, Saros' soundtrack has a lot of atmospheric tracks that just kind of blend into the background of the game. It's not something that you really take much notice of, but you definitely would have felt it if it was gone. And just like Far Far West, which we just took a look at the other day, Saros' soundtrack shines when the action music comes in, and in particular the boss music. And if I had to describe the vibes of the soundtrack, I would say it is what you would get if Health made the Doom 2016 soundtrack. That's the kind of vibe that I get from it. And when this music gets going, so does the intensity of the gameplay. It is an absolutely stellar soundtrack that matches the mood of the game without fault. There are a couple of the tracks on Spotify, but the full soundtrack won't come out till later on in the month. I'm actually really looking forward to giving that a proper listen through when that drops. In conclusion, Saros is absolutely excellent. I loved my time spent with this game and I absolutely recommend picking it up. There is unfortunately a catch with Saros, and that is that it is a first-party Sony title, so it is currently only a PlayStation 5 exclusive game, and may very well stay that way for a while, depending on if Sony changes their stance on exclusives again. That being said, the Returnal PC port was pretty mid, so I would hope that even if Saros made it to PC, that it would be in a better state than Returnal was left in. Also, it is a AAA priced title, so expect it to be around $70 US or $99 to $110 Australian. Obviously, that's expensive, but I don't have any regrets buying this game. I thought this was well worth the money, at least for me. This is one of the best feeling third-person shooters I've played in a long while, and the intensity of the gameplay often had me on the edge of my seat. The developers were able to take the already good gameplay of Returnal and refine it to an insanely satisfying to play experience. Sure, I have a couple of reservations about the story and the strength of the writing overall, but I think the quality of everything else on offer is more than enough to offset my grievances with the game. So as of time of recording, I have about 17 hours of game time in the game and I'm pretty much at the end. I have one more thing to do and the story is completely done, which could be another 30 minutes or 3 hours depending on how stuck I get. As it is a roguelike, the time to beat will vary from person to person, and I would probably put my skill level at about average, so give or take an hour or few, depending on how skilled you are or how much trouble you have. And look, if a fully priced AAA title at the moment is outside of your budget, Returnal is a part of the game's catalog that comes with PlayStation Plus Extra membership. If you've never played that, then I highly also just recommend playing Returnal. I know I spent the majority of the video talking about how Saros is a major improvement on almost everything over Returnal, but Returnal is still a fantastic game in its own right. But yeah, Saros, it is an absolutely amazing game. And that is everything that I have to say about Saros. There is actually so much to the game that I almost certainly missed something important out while talking about the game, but we're just going to call it here anyway. So thank you so much for watching the video. Please leave it a like if you liked it, and please consider subscribing if you're new to the channel. As always, many thanks to my YouTube members, whose continued support is always appreciated. I'm not quite sure what game's going to be next, but it is May already, so that means we are less than a month out from Summer Games Fest, which is very scary. But I'm sure I'll see you all soon with something. So, catch you then.
What's it like being a fucking hack?